team, so I'll be hosting the session this morning. I'll be monitoring our time and the chat throughout and making sure all of your questions are addressed. I believe Dan is going to record the session if he hasn't already started that, so that'll be available for future viewing. And without further ado, I would like to introduce Laurie Faulkner, Chair of the Fashion Studies Program at KCAD, and she's going to deliver her presentation on international fashion immersion and sparking sustainable ideas.
All right, thank you, John. I'm going to share my screen and are you seeing a full screen?
Yes.
Of my PowerPoint? Great. That says Hong Kong? Okay. Well, I welcome everybody to this session today. I'm going to speak about a trip that we took as a fashion studies student that was taken 2018, I believe. No, 2019. My years are getting kind of mixed up now. We have not been able to take a trip since we did take a trip to Australia in 2019 in December, but this was earlier in 2019. And so this is our trip to Hong Kong, Guanzo, Beijing, Shanghai, and it was a Fashion Week trip. While there, we studied all different areas of fashion. We studied retail, we studied sustainability, we visited all kinds of places. So today I'm going to share with you a little bit of the trip itself and the places that we visited and how I incorporated the different areas of fashion as we went to different places. So the first part, just want to explain just a basic part about sustainability. And many industries have jumped into sustainability much faster than fashion. Fashion has taken a long time. I can remember, I think it's been 30 years ago at least, when I was in class at Michigan State. Or not in class, I was talking with a Michigan State professor, and she said to me, her name is Dr. Susan Sontag, and she said to me, we need to go the sustainability route. That's just something we need to do. And it was hard to move people in fashion towards that route. And I remember she was the first person I knew that had carpeting installed in her basement that was made from recycled 2-liter bottles, and that was very expensive and way at the forefront. So it's fashion is having a hard time jumping in, but I think we are partway there, and so that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. So the slide represents the circle of life, and in fashion, this is the life cycle of a product. So we start out in the fiber, yarn, and fabric stage. And once that fiber fabric becomes a fabric, we turn it into a design. So we have the design stage at the top, which is the garment design, where you're selecting the fabrics, materials, and techniques. So you can select fabrics that are based on raw materials that are considered sustainable, or practices. They might not be natural raw materials, they might be chemical, but they are made in such a way that it is a more sustainable process. There are different companies that are working on dyeing processes that are more natural, use less water, but still give us the same colors and effects. So we have the fabric stage that we have to worry about, actually the fiber stage in growing it, the fabric stage, and then the design stage. What techniques are we going to use? There are some that are more material friendly and have higher usage patterns. So that's the design stage. Then you go to production and the pattern making and toiling and the garment construction. And at this point, sample products are still made by hand, but we are seeing people trying to move towards the 3D design of products so that we don't have that sampling process. Again, very difficult and time consuming and expensive. So being done in a few places. but not a lot of places. Then moving on to distribution and how do we get our goods back and forth from production to retail? And we want to reduce the carbon footprint as much as we can. So the closer things are together, the fabric, the design, where it's going for retail, the better. Or how can we shrink the carbon footprint in that distribution stage? Then we go on to use. And this is a big one that designers can start to attempt to affect. And this is how our clients or customers are wearing the product, how they're laundering the product, if they're repairing the product versus just throwing it away, and that the product lasts a long time. And then we go into end of life, and that's the garment disposal, where we like to try to figure out a way to reuse the product, upcycle it, or perhaps chop it up into pieces like recycling and turn it into a new product. Like Lensing has a refurbra that they're working on, and it's basically a product that is made from chopped up cotton that they can recycle and put into a new product. So that is our life cycle. Our first stage of our trip, we left from Grand Rapids, and this is the group that traveled, and we flew into O'Hare from Grand Rapids. And when we arrived at the airport, there was a display up called Fashion Packed. It was the Fashion Packed Challenge. And this was done, a display. And you can see behind the people, there are garments there behind them. And to the left, you'll see a screen that shows the recycled products that were used. Columbia College of Art and Design paired with the O'Hare Airport. And the vendors at the O'Hare Airport each chose one product from their store as inspiration. So a student was paired with a vendor to given a piece of inspiration. And then these products in the background are all recycled materials. And they were given these recycled materials to create garments from. The garments that they created are behind the students. So this is the winning, excuse me, this is the winning garment. At the time we went through, the garment had not been chosen. And this particular garment, I think this is the one where it was made from the leather seats from one of the airplanes. So we have a company in Grand Rapids that gets leather from old seats that are that needs to be recycled. And the company's called Public Thread, and they make it into bags locally there in Grand Rapids. So that had a really good connection because leather can be used in all different ways. So our flight went from Hong Kong went from Grand Rapids all the way to Hong Kong, the longest flight of my life. And the students as well, we struggled a bit, I think, because, you're passing time zones, but we were very happy once we arrived. And our first part of our trip was to Victoria Peak. So we took this tram, which you see on the left, and we took it up to the top of Victoria Peak. This is my favorite picture from the trip, showing the group that went and overlooking Victoria, or on Victoria Peak overlooking the harbor in Hong Kong. It's always a little bit hazy there due to the pollution and the production that goes on. So that should be noted as far as when we're talking about sustainability. There's another picture that kind of shows the some of that haze that is there. This is a picture taken a little bit lower down, and Hong Kong is a really interesting mix of old. So you see the boat down there in the in the water, and new. That's for the industrial designer, John, right? So it's a very interesting mix. First place we went was to Stanley Market, and this is in the fishing village of Aberdeen. This is a flea market, and in this flea market, we didn't see a lot of repurposed clothing or people selling old goods. Most of these things were newer goods that were there were some duplicates of like counterfeit goods there, where designer goods are made and they look exactly like the designer good, but there are small differences. So there were things like that there, and low cost to medium cost goods in this market. It was a flea market that was a bit up, because you can see a bit up in scale, because you can see the or the headers there for each of the sections. You know, you wouldn't have that in a more makeshift flea market. I have one of those later on, which you will see. This is what it looks like as soon as you step out of the flea market. You are right on the water, which was really, really beautiful. At night, we watched there's a show that happens every single night in Hong Kong Harbor, lights and music, and you're surrounded all the way around by lights and music. So the next day we went to a place called Chef Works, and Chef Works is worldwide. We have many, many restaurants here in the States that use Chef Works. And this was a great visit, not necessarily for sustainability, although they do have some practices that are sustainable. This was really for students to see a showroom that actually does sampling. So when we came in, this is what you saw on the walls, all the different examples of their current line for anything to do with a restaurant. So waiters, chefs, their shoes in the background. So this is like their little retail space. This is the man there in the black was the person who was in charge of this particular area. And this is the other side of the showroom. So you can see some of the finished product. One of the things you can see from them taking videos and pictures, this was a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I was gonna say it's a 15 head embroidery machine, which I had never seen before. I've seen some large embroidery machines, but there are 15 jackets lined up here that are being embroidered all at the same time. So this is part of their sampling process and also part of their production. They do some production here, and this is how things get personalized. We went on and we were able to see their testing area. Some of the things we weren't able to take pictures of, but they do their own testing. So the students could see pull testing. They could see abrasion resistance, where you see what happens after something has been abraded for 24 hours. They do launderability, stretch, dimensional stability, and tests, things like that. So it was really good for them to see the background. Swire Properties was with us throughout this trip. And Swire Properties is really headquartered in Miami, but they have commercial properties in Hong Kong and mainland China. We were invited to the Swire Properties boardroom at Pacific Place. Pacific Place is a very glamorous, huge mall, but it's more than a mall. And what Swire Properties does is create residential living. They have apartments, they have malls, they have all kinds of different retail spaces. And the idea behind Swire Properties is they want you to visit as a destination. So kind of like Disney World, they want you to stay there. They want you to go, they want you to stay there, they want you to eat there, and they want you to play there, and they want you to buy things there. So it was a very interesting look at it's like an all-inclusive. They're trying to entice customers to come and spend all their money in one place. So we were given a tour of the Pacific Place, and that's what you see in the background. There were actually 3 tiers to this mall. And that walkway led to more residences. So that's where, people were just able to come in and out. Inside this mall was an exhibit from Victorian Albert Museum called Shoes, Pleasure, and Pain. So we were lucky enough to be able to see that as well. There were shoes from very old shoes, very new shoes from celebrities like Elton John, and shoes that were made by hand, shoes that were made in a production facility, shoes that were 3D printed. And you can see some Nikes on the far left there. So all kinds of shoes encompassing whether they were comfortable or not, it didn't matter. So that's the name, Pleasure and Pain. And the interesting part is the gentleman in the back on the right was our tour guide, and he was a fashion design student from Hong Kong Polytechnic University. So we were able to share some of the things that they do in their program, and then my students were able to share what they do in their fashion studies program. So it was nice to compare different college programs. While in Hong Kong, they have a huge fabric and trim market. These are stores located in a specific portion of the city, but unlike anything that you've ever seen before, this is one small store that did ribbon and buttons. So you can see we went from booth to booth to booth. by the headings there, and students were able to buy whatever they wanted. Things were relatively inexpensive, so I encouraged them to buy things for their capstone collections while they were here, and everything was available to them. This is one of the spots that was a textile fabrics, and we were given cards so we could call and order fabrics. All of the fabrics are already swatched and on the walls. And you can see, if you look at those swatches, there are groups of swatches. There's not just one. So you're encouraged to take those swatches with you, as many as you want. And so we loaded up bags of swatches. I had a huge bag to bring home. They're free. They're great for students to use. And they show the range of products that are available in Hong Kong and China, which is incredible. When you're used to Fields and Joann's and Hobby Lobby, it's pretty exciting. Another place we went is Yanqiao Street Hawker Bazaar. So this is a flea market that you can see was barely standing, yet it had stood for, I think they said it was over 100 years old. On the outside, you see the fence that contains it, but up above there are just all kinds of drapes and tarps to keep the water out. Somehow they managed to keep the fabric inside intact. And so what this fabric is, and this is a really good part about the reuse or sustainability, these are all cut ends that weren't used or dead goods. Dead goods are goods that were not used by the manufacturer, that are still on rolls, that are viable goods, but they're just sitting there because probably the roll was too small to make the next production run. And so it's filled with rows and rows, and the students were taking, I mean, you could take beautiful pictures. Look at the silks behind Marissa there. There are 10 different colored silks. So it looks kind of like a mess. Over on the left-hand side, you can see a 60s print just hanging there. Wonderful place to buy goods. You can buy silk very inexpensively. So that's a different part of retail, and buying dead goods is a great way to add to the sustainability of your product. The next place we went was called Redress, and this was a pioneering Hong Kong business it works to reduce the textile waste and promote environmental sustainability in the fashion industry in Hong Kong. And Redress is a bit like Goodwill, except for it's a little bit different, but along the same lines. So if you're looking for something in the US that does that kind of thing, they have different sites where people can drop their goods, and they drop their goods in the cardboard box that is behind there. It says, and on that box, it says 343 tons of textiles are dumped into Hong Kong's landfills every day. Hong Kong isn't that big, so 343 tons a day is pretty impressive. And so these bins come in, and then we actually participated in this for a part of a day. So this was their give back. I try to do a give back or something where they're learning about sustainability and helping others in each of our trips that we do. So everything is dumped in the center, and the students are asked to sort. And there were about 20 different ways to sort. They sort by size, they sort by a category, by type of fiber that's used. So it's pretty specific, and that's not really done at Goodwill. I pulled these out because I found this Prada dress that was in the bin, which, you know, you just want to say, this looks like my size. But anyway, so this Prada dress went to a boutique. So they do like Goodwill, and they do sell high-end goods, also like the fur. That was a real fur that we found in one of our bins during our day. So they have higher end goods that you separate, and they go to a boutique. There are other goods that are separated that are given to different organizations to clothe people. And then there are those that are pulled out for recycling into other textiles. From there, we crossed over and went to to Guanzo, and probably the most traumatic part of our trip was trying to get through the border between Hong Kong and China. And now we've seen that take place over the last few years about the difference between what Hong Kong feels they're about and how China wants to control what they do. So it was really difficult, and some students had a tough time getting through there. We were held up We don't know why. So we had vans waiting for us on the other side. And so some of us were in the vans waiting for the other people. So some were sent through and others had more trouble. Very interesting. And that's one of those things that you deal with when you're on these international trips. So these are 2 pictures of Guanzo. I have a student that graduated last year from Guanzo. So it was really fun to get his take on Guanzo before we went there, because he's lived there his whole life. We went to CTT. This is Chinese Textile Traders. And Jeremy McLaurin, who's in the right, took us through their showroom. They do jeans. They do all kinds of cotton products, but this was the jeans showroom. And you can see they have pretty much any style that you would want. They work with a global network of clients, many brand names that you know. They will make the jean and then put the licensee's name on it. So that's how our brand, that's how, when it says made in China, it might be made by his facility and then the designer name is actually put on it later. So it was interesting to see the showroom. We went through, this was another part of their showroom where it was leggings and some of the tops and activewear. And then we took about a 2-hour bus ride to the Guangdong province where we went on factory visits. The interesting part about their factories, the factory is to the right, and you can't tell from the outside what type of factory it is, but the machines are all on the inside. But if you look up on the hill, the stone hill up there, you would see apartments above that stone. That's where everyone who's sewing lives. And the interesting thing we found when we went into this facility, this is their shipping and distribution area. This is the sample room. So it's a smaller area where they're making the first samples, that many of these people are related. They come from families and the family goes and works. They go home for lunch right next door in their apartments. And then for an hour or half an hour, and they walk right back to the factory. So it's like a community. And that's one of the things I don't think students realize, is that a lot of these, they are families that are working here. So they're related, and they also live right next door. So this becomes their life. And that's why it's important that things are kept clean and that they're given good working conditions, because that's how they spend their days. And they're very proud of their work. So we were taken down the production line to look at the different parts of making jeans. And these are some of the jeans that are all piled up. And the gentlemen who are working on rivets and doing the top stitching for the jeans in the background. You see, they have some good light, so that's really wonderful. We were taken out there and taken to a different showroom. So the showroom had some of the jackets and other things, all cotton, usually cotton based. This is the front room of that same, so they have a showroom in downtown Guangzhou, and then they have a showroom actually at the factory. This particular place had a showroom at the factory. So we were able to tour both areas. The production manager of CT Traders, took us upstairs. So this is the top part of the factory, and we were given a PowerPoint on process. Now, one thing that they had mechanized a little bit, they're working on the 3D portion of sampling. So for sustainability, that was their piece that they were working on. Some of the fabrics that they bring in are sustainable, and that's based on what the brand wants or the person that is buying the product from them. So that's one area. And the other is trying to take photos, and you can see the product there in the light box in the background. Take photos and make 3D replications of them. Try to drape them 3-dimensionally so they can decrease the money used in sampling and the time and effort and textiles used in sampling, and also to use that for e-commerce on website. So this young man took us through the process of what he was doing. When we got back to Guangzhou, our next day, we spent in a place that this is really unlike anything anywhere in the world. This is a textile mall. This textile mall was several city blocks long and 7 floors high. It's the Guanzo Zanda fabric market. This is what it looks like inside one of the blocks. So it goes on 4 blocks. And each of these levels has fabric and trims in booths like a retail mall. So it is a designer's paradise, first of all, but it also tells you how much production is going on and how many fabrics and trims the world is making it and China is making. It's incredible. And so you know that not all of this is being used. So it gives you a hint into some of the things that we may need to fix in the future to keep the fashion industry sustainable. We went on to China Fashion Week, and what this was an interesting place, and I loved it because you can see in the background that's an old factory. There was an area of old brick buildings that they actually used and redeveloped into this fashion forum center, and that's where Beijing Fashion Forum took place. We went to a Beijing Fashion Week show. I always try to take the students to one Fashion Week show. So this was it. And this was the show. The designer is holding the flowers. So we did a meet and greet with the designer afterwards. I wanted them to learn a little bit from her. This is another picture or shot of the China, where China Fashion Week took place, and that redeveloped area of galleries and buildings. In the center was a place they called the D Hub. And this is where the Beijing Fashion Forum took place. Part of, as you walked in, this is the entryway. Around the edge, around the circular area, those were the emerging designers with their lines, including HIH, which I'll mention in a minute. And that went around. And as you walk to the center of the Fashion Forum, that's where the conference took place. And the conference was establishing new ecosystem for sustainable development by the fashion industry. We were lucky enough to attend this, and the two main speakers that were so inspiring were, the first was Carrie Summers, and this is Carrie Summers, and she is the founder and global operations director of Fashion Revolution. So fashionrevolution.org is the originator of Who Made My Clothes. And I don't know how much you might know about that, so I wanted to tell you a little bit about it. This really was started after I think I have the next slide. I just wanted you to see her face there at the podium. But on April 24th, in 2013, 1,333 people were killed when the Rana Plaza factory complex collapsed in Bangladesh. This was a factory making clothing for some of the top name brands that you probably wear. 2,300 people were injured, and most of these were young women. So we had factories that were putting out tons and tons of garments, and they weren't really thinking about the well-being of the person who was sewing, who was making those garments. So this is one of those areas where fashion is trying to improve. And since then, Carrie Summers started this fashionrevolution.org, where they try to have students. There's a place for students, there's a place for brands, there's a place for educators to click in on this website and to use your voice and power to inform brands that we want change, and brands have been reacting, and brands are able to go in there and show the transparency of their design process. So on April 24th, that's when this happened. Usually every year, and it's coming up again, April 19th through the 25th of 2021, Fashion Revolution will start their week, and you'll see it during Fashion Week. You'll see a lot of marketing, and you'll see a lot of posting of students and educators and brands with a person saying hashtag who made my clothes, so that you think about that person and how the whole system works, because we need those people. Every part of the system is important, and we need to make sure that people are treated humanely, paid a fair living wage, and we still have a sellable product in the end. This is the outside of D-Hub, the designer showrooms. And this is one of those particular showroom, this is one picture of one place, and the fabrications, those are all silk fabrications in the back, and then the designs that are available in the front on mannequins. So they're like little stores, and these were emerging brands that were trying to get large retailers to pick them up, retailers from all over the world. So in one of the little pods, I guess, or spaces, was HAH, and they're out of Los Angeles, California. The girl to the right, the woman to the right, is one of their designers, and the designers were just a couple years older than my students, and they had just started as designers at HAH. So this was a wonderful meeting of the minds, sharing of information. We talked about what we do with sustainability. They talked about what they're doing with sustainability. And then this year, 2021, it was just announced that the CFDA, the Council of Fashion Designers of America, awarded HAH the Sustainable Company of the Year. So it's kind of interesting how things come full circle. And this was just one small company. We were able to talk to them. Here's another one of the designers. And they were sharing samples, sharing products. So I'm going to go now to, and this was another of the emerging designers. I think it's wonderful when students can meet, young designers that are just a couple years ahead of where they're going to be, and understand their struggles, their triumphs, what they would do differently, because you can cut the learning curve when you're talking and communicating with other people. So how do we use some of these things that we have learned in our trips? We've done a trip to London and Paris. We did a trip, also our most recent trip was to Australia, which if I have time, I'll talk about later on, but studying the wool industry and resort wear in Australia, very interesting. So we did Sydney, Melbourne, Geelong, and the Blue Mountains. And that was the last trip because that was in December of 2019, before our world's kind of changed and travel has stopped. So zero waste design is one of those design methods that we study in KCFS 323, Sustainable Fashion. And you'll see on the bottom left a pattern, and you'll notice that the pattern is square or really rectangular. That represents 1 yard of fabric, using every part of that fabric. Students are not allowed to waste any parts of the fabric. So they have to figure out what to do with all those odd pieces. Normally we would cut the shape we want and sew it together to make a fitted garment or to make what we want. But in this case, I challenge them to make, and for this one, this is the jean pattern. So what you're seeing on the left is the zero waste pattern for the jeans on the right, made by Emma Nada. So it's a very complicated pattern, but you can see those long diagonal patterns. You'll see those on the pants, how they were sewn in. The top is also zero waste design, and then she printed her logo, which is Emma K, on the top part. So the top is zero waste, a separate pattern, and the bottom is zero waste. On the right, you see another design method that we use called subtraction cutting. And this is a method that uses all of the fabric as well. And the idea behind it is, instead of cutting away the parts you don't want, the part that you cut away is the part that the body passes through. It's a very avant-garde method of designing, and it makes the students, they can't really control the process. It's a more creative. And so you see these garments are unlike most garments. They're not constructed like Emma K's top and bottom. These are flowy kind of garments that happen organically, and every part of the fabric is used. So this is the zero waste pattern for top. So you can see how she has patterned this all out, and the space that you see that's a smaller rectangle, that's the seam allowance. So that's what's used to stitch the garment together. The collar, look at the collar on her garment. You can see the collar along the left-hand side. So everything has to be, people think of fashion designers as creative, really creative, maybe out there, but look at the engineering that goes into making garments. We are clothing engineers. And I think that that's one of the things that I like to get across to students and to others when they visit. This is the pattern piece, the zero waste patterning, which we call a marker, when all the pattern pieces are in one place. And you'll see down the right-hand side, that's the zipper, that's the zip front, and how specifically that had to be placed. So another thing that we do is consumer products design, and that is taking an old jacket and turning it into something new. So on the left, this is a leather jacket, and the student deconstructed the leather jacket. This is Maria Dolly, and she made this beautiful dress And the part on the left that looks like the lovely satin fabric, that's the lining of the jacket and the waist. And on the right-hand side is the leather. On the right is a men's suit jacket, really elegant silk lined. And that is the silk lining, the jacquard that's on the front of that. And then the wool, 100% wool, beautiful worsted wool, creates the rest of that. Did a little sightseeing. So Tiananmen Square, I try to bring culture in wherever we can. And there are places that we decide to visit as a group, and some I decide ahead of time. This was where they were doing the lowering of the flag, which happens every evening. So there are no people there. You're gated off for this, and which is pretty amazing because you see people everywhere in China. We went to the Temple of Heaven, which is considered the holiest place in Beijing. It's the largest ancient imperial architectural structure for worship in the world. It's gorgeous. And no trip to Beijing would be complete without a trip to the Great Wall. So we went up and hiked a part of the Great Wall and then did the alpine slide down. So we had to have a picture commemorating that. Our last sightseeing places were we went to the Bird's Nest and went in so we could see a little bit of how the architecture that was put together for the Beijing Olympics. This is the tower to the left that held the flame, I believe. Throughout, we went to different Swire properties. So we also, when we got to Beijing, we visited Taikoo Sanlitun, and that is pictured in the back, and we're taken around by a representative there, and they talked about the retail spaces there. Also went to, then we flew to Shanghai after being in Beijing. In Shanghai, I have a student who graduated in 2017, and then she's my first student who went on to get her master's of fashion design from Glasgow School of Art in Scotland. She finished that, and while there, I went out to dinner with her and caught up with her, so that was wonderful. And it's nice to have our international students we're able to visit them and see what they're doing when we go to these places. And this is the Crystal Galleria shopping mall. This was a second charity event that we did, and we partnered with Children's Aid of China, and the students did a video with some of the Chinese students, and it was put on their marketplace or their website to raise money. We made it to the end. This is the Shanghai airport, and we still have smiles on our face after 2 weeks. And then I just wanted to end with, this is our KCAD Fashion Studies mission statement, and we have general program outcomes. And I just want to read the mission statement because this is what I try to do. The KCAD Fashion Studies program prepares students for successful careers in the fashion industry by providing an education designed to master critical thinking, design, construction, communication, and professionalism through partnerships locally and globally. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that people might have. I think that's the end of my 40 minutes.
Okay,
Thanks,
so we
Celine.
have some questions in the chat here. I'll read back.
Sure.
I think. First from Shelley. How did Hong Kong become such a key center for fashion?
Well, it's very interesting. It's because there are so many expatriates there from England. So there are a lot of British people who speak English, and they are connected they're connected with mainland China. So it's easy to make the connections because you have English speaking people that are already in Hong Kong that are able to help you communicate the US. So all the US brands communicate with the Chinese manufacturers.
Great. Elise asks, at the top you mentioned Susan Sontag. Is this the Susan Sontag who wrote on photography?
It is not, but I like to think of them in the same. She was my mentor, and no, it's not the same.
Okay. And her follow-on question, did the students begin work on their capstone projects prior to the trip?
No, they did not. This used to be a senior year trip, and it has turned into a junior year trip so that they are able to experience this before they're working in professional practices to define their brand, and then moving on to their capstone where they actually create their collections to be shown in the final fashion show, or our capstone fashion show at the end of the year.
Gotcha. Laurie asked, did you plan the whole trip and the places that you go, or do you use a service to find the factories in every other location, etc.?
I've done both. The trip to England and France, the London and Paris trip, I spent over 120 hours planning that trip on my own. I could not find anyone who would work with a small group. They had to be a larger group. So I had talked with different people, but I couldn't get anyone. It wasn't lucrative enough for them to do it. So that was a lot of time and energy. Since then, one of the companies that I talked to at that point, the father owned it, and he wasn't willing to do smaller groups, but now the daughter owns the group, and she has been willing to work with smaller groups. So now I work with the daughter of.
Okay. Elise says, bravo on the zero waste project. Clay asks, luxury brands have worn wear recycled products, but they don't seem to spend much money advertising, publicizing their sustainability efforts in favor of advertising their more expensive new products. Care to comment?
Yes, it is. That's a problem. And until we can be more vocal and we have more people from their clientele that are buying from them that are going to require and demand them to do that, I don't think they're going to do that. They've existed for a long time, like Hermes. We when we were in Shanghai, we went to the Hermes Maison, which is, I think it was 8 stories high, and it's a museum of, the harnesses, because they started with horses, and the harnesses and how they started all the way to present day, including these this desk made entirely out of Hermes leather and the logo, and incredible. I can't even remember how many hundreds of thousands of dollars it was. So yeah, you have these two, and that's the thing with the fashion industry. And until that clientele demands that they, just recently, one of these high-end brands or luxury brands was caught burning their clearance merchandise. They don't do clearance because they don't want you to view their product as ever going down in value. So they would take that product and they would burn it instead of reusing it, taking it apart, whatever. I understand if you don't want someone to have that, sale price tag on your merchandise, if that's the company, but take the product back and use your dollars to figure out something to do with that product.
Interesting. Shelley asks, how is the enrollment in the fashion studies program, and how's the job market?
Well, I love to talk about the job market because, and this has really changed in the past 2 years too. I have about a third of my students that are employed in New York City, because I offer the 3-year, there are 2 programs. We have the 4-year program where they study everything at KCAD, and they stay their senior year, do the Capstone collection, and then show it during our big Capstone fashion show, which is free, by the way. That's how we get a lot of I use that as recruitment for high schools. So our enrollment is good because we get a lot of these high schoolers from local high schools. I also go into places like Rockford High School, and I do a career day, and I talk about this Beijing fashion trip, and I talked about our Australia fashion trip and what the students do. And I invite those students to the fashion show, and they come. And so that's how I've been able to keep my enrollment, especially during this time when it's tough. But the other part of that is always reaching out to industry. And you're going to hear that. I can see that different people are talking about collaborations. It's collaborating and getting the word out there that you have the program, because there are big name programs like RISD, like FIT. So my other that people know, So we need our name out there more. So I try to do these collaborations so other people say, hey, did you know KCAD Fashion Studies has a program? We actually had the CEO of, or CFO, no, CEO, Stephen Kolb, several years ago come in, of the CFDA, sorry, I talked about the Council of Fashion Designers of America. He was the CEO. He came in and did the commencement speech for KCAD. I mean, that's a big deal because that's a name that people know throughout the world in fashion, and he is still the CEO, and lives in New York City. So those connections where people can say, hey, there's a place that you could go for fashion right here. So the other program we have is a 3-year fashion program, which is through Fashion Institute of Technology in New York City. It's a program that I did as an undergrad, and I've been the liaison both at Michigan State and now here for, gosh, I don't even know, 25 years, maybe more. And I visit FIT every so often, and I knew it from when I was there, but things change. So I go and look at it. They have a wonderful museum, and students are able to apply to FIT and then spend their senior year in New York City studying. So that gives people or students alternatives. And for completed applications for that program, we have a 100% acceptance rate. The program accepts 50 students a year from across the country and the world. And last year we had 5. We had 10% of those 50 students came from KCAD. So we have a 100% rate. Everyone that has completed their applications has been accepted. And this just gives them an opportunity to reach out to New York companies and work there. So I have about 1/3 there and 2/3 here. We have so many companies here that people just don't know about, including Wolverine Worldwide, which Luke talked about. He gets leathers from there. And I have 2 students there. So Meyer, we have Public Thread. We have projects going on all the time. The She-Bra, if you saw that on Shark Tank, that's made, I mean, that's a Grand Rapids woman that put that together, and then she was funded by the Sharks. And now that's $1 million company. We have startups all over. So 2/3 are employed here, and the market is good because people still need clothing. It has slowed through this period, but you still need to dress yourself. Maybe not in suits, right? We have different markets, but our activewear, loungewear, excelling, and e-commerce through the roof has really excelled during this period as well.
Okay,
Thank you, Laurie. Can I ask one question that came to mind as you were talking, Laurie? Is Pamela DeVos still supporting our program there?
Yes, and she sponsors that trip.
Okay, fabulous.
Yes.
So Shelley also asked if you need any in-kind gifts of clothing for your program.
Well, it's interesting that you ask because Ms. DeVos just contacted us and she wants to donate some of her designs, which these are thousands of dollars worth of each one might be somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 depending. And so she's working on a donation. And yes, I mean, we're figuring out a place to house that. So it's possible. I have a small collection of, they are made by a home sewer, but they're couture level clothing that we use as demonstrations. I have my own collection I use as demonstrations. So yes, we do. We just have to work out where it's going to be stored, but there's nothing like an actual example. The other thing that we use, Shelley, and this is, I worked with the Grand Rapids Public Museum, and we together got a grant of $100,000 that employed some of, I think we did 5 or 6 students from the fashion studies program, and they went in and digitized the entire clothing collection and researched it, digitized it. It is all online. So they had internships as curators and kind of digitize, the whole making things available on the internet. So they have that kind of background now, the fashion studies students do. They were paid through this grant, and now anyone in the world can use this information. It's free, and the Met doesn't have that in New York. So that's a really nice way that we don't have to own the garments, but we can use the garments. But yeah, up close and personal and having it in your hands, there's nothing like it. So you could contact me if you know someone that is interested in doing that.
I just wanted to insert here, if you didn't know, Pamela DeVos is known as Pamela Rowland. That's the line.
Okay. Catherine asks, is the trip required? I recommend to students to have some sort of a broad experience.
It is now required. I just redid my program plan last year, and this is a required trip.
Excellent. And Bill asks, is there much media out there that is educating the industry and the public about sustainable design?
There is, and it's more, there's more and more every day. One of the parts I didn't really get to speak about, but I can insert that in here is, and that's really important, and it goes back to Clay's question as well, is educating our consumer. If our consumer knows the waste that goes on, I mean, there a lot of consumers, they love these new styles and they love that clothing is inexpensive, can be inexpensive, too inexpensive, that we buy it, use it, and throw it away. If they can be educated to understand that the way that they launder that, if they can wait, if they don't wash their jeans every time, they could wear their jeans 4 or 5, 2 weeks, 3 weeks before washing them. If it will maintain their jean longer too, it will make it look better. It will also reduce all of the water and the products that are going in to taking care of these garments all the time. If we can educate them so that instead of throwing it away, that they repair it. If we can teach basic, and I'm doing a presentation for the Herrick Public Library in March about repair, about sustainability, and about repair and alteration, so that we could change things. If they don't fit us anymore, we can change them to fit, and we can repair them. So we are extending the life cycle. It's a lot about educating the consumer to be more sustainable, so that they in turn will demand it from the manufacturers and designers.
Great. Any other questions for Laurie? We've got about, looks like maybe 5 minutes left before the next session. No, excellent job, Laurie.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank
Hey,
you,
I got a question.
Sure.
So we're
Bill.
always in digital art and design looking for educational, informational media to make for people, you know?
Yep.
And I'm wondering if I could plant a seed, maybe there's something that we could make that's educational, that's not already out there. If you could think of something that's needed, you know, something that kind of a missing piece of the education puzzle on this issue. You know, we don't want to make stuff that's already out there, right? We're always looking for, you know, to add to the conversation. So just plant a seed, ask a question. If you think of something, you know how to find me, right?
Yeah. So you're thinking like an animated, are you thinking like an animated cartoon that we could put on our website that shows the things that we do in our sustainable fashion class?
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't have to be cartoon style. It could be infographic
style. So it doesn't, not necessarily.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or it could be cartoon. I mean, it depends on the age. Like
right.
maybe if you want to, you know, target a younger student, you know, the place to get, the place to make your case, we think, is in K-12.
With the youth.
Right. And you get teachers, right?
Yes.
There's 50 million young kids in school.
Yes.
That's, and if you can get, you know, 10% of the teachers to, you know, show a piece of media, well, that's 5 million, you know?
Right.
So it's, you know, there's a lot of opportunity there if you want to, but, you know, the things, something that we would make for an elementary school versus a middle school versus a high school is a little different, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, it's a little bit different writing, a little bit different visuals. So high school and adults pretty much the same.
Okay. Sounds great.
So yeah, if you think of something, you know, if you think of something that's missing out there, something that could help our students and other college students in fashion programs, you know, something like that. You probably have a pretty good handle on what's there now and what maybe needs to be added, you know?
Yes.
What we like to focus on is the value proposition, like what's in it for you, you know, and make that connection. So,
well, it seems to be when the students are doing the branding during their professional practices, they each need to have their brand. We're working on it right now. In fact, in that class, they need to have some kind of social responsibility statement. It's crucial. I don't think you can have a brand without a social responsibility statement. And so I'm finding that that while I'm asking them to figure out what that is for their brand, that they're really looking at their sustainable class and what they did in sustainability. And they might not like one method, but they might be interested in another. So, you know, pick one and make a start. That's really, and that's what you would want to say to these young people too. Pick an area and make a start.
We could do a message around that, actually. Yeah. Okay. I'll follow up.
Okay.
Yeah. Nice presentation. I wish I was on that trip. That just looked so amazing. Just incredible.
It was. Wonderful. And I'm so happy that we did it at the time we did it, because doing it even now would be way different. So the climate was just right. So I'm very thankful for the timing of it as well.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, Laurie. We're going to